She found them huddled against a weeping concrete wall, a man in $1,000 suit clutching a terrified girl like she was the only thing keeping his heart beating. He was fading fast, his blood staining the child's cream-colored sweater, and he was aiming a heavy black pistol straight at her forehead. "Stay with me until the end, because the choice this man makes in a freezing Seattle warehouse is something you have to see to believe." It's a moment that didn't just save 3 lives, it redefined an entire city's underworld. Before we dive into the shadows of Junwoo's world, do us a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe to join our growing community of storytellers. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a high-stakes chapter of our cinematic tales. It helps us bring more of these incredible stories to life. And I have to know, where in the world are you watching us from today? Let us know in the comments below. We love seeing how far our invisible world reaches. Now, let's begin. The freezing mist had been clinging to the Seattle waterfront for 3 nights straight. The kind of bone-deep dampness that turned rusted corrugated steel into razor blades and made the shadows in the industrial district feel like solid weight. Charlie Hayes pulled the collar of her faded denim jacket higher, her breath blooming in white plumes that vanished into the dark. The streetlights had flickered out an hour ago, leaving the condemned sector in a hollow, predatory silence. Charlie hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She traded her last scrap of copper piping for a lukewarm bottle of water she was currently nursing. At 9 years old, she was a professional at being invisible, a shadow among the ruins of the city's forgotten warehouses. She wasn't looking for trouble, she was just looking for enough discarded wire to buy a hot meal. A muffled, hitched sob echoed through the rusted rafters of Warehouse 14, a sound too soft for the wind but too desperate for the local stray cats. Most people would have run the other way, but Charlie's street sense, that hyper-tuned radar for vulnerability she developed after 2 years on her own, told her someone was terrified. Her instincts screamed that she was stepping into a graveyard before she even rounded the corner to find the man in the charcoal suit and the girl who looked just like a doll broken in the dirt. The warehouse smelled of stagnant salt water and the sharp, metallic tang of fresh blood. Charlie moved through the darkness like a ghost, her old sneakers silent on the cracked concrete. She had been tracking a loose copper lead for 20 minutes, but as she rounded the rusted skeletal remains of a forklift, the air changed. It became heavy, charged with a predatory stillness that made the hair on her arms stand up. Then she heard it, a small, hitched sob, followed by a man's voice, raspy and dangerous. "Stay behind me, Yuna. Do not look." Charlie froze mid-step. 10 feet away, bathed in the sickly green glow of a flickering emergency light, sat a man who looked like he had fallen from a different world. His charcoal suit was tailored to perfection, but the white shirt underneath was a map of crimson streaks. He was leaning against a concrete pillar, his legs stretched out, his jaw set in a hard, disciplined line. Clutched against his chest was a little girl in a cream knit sweater, her large eyes glossy with a terror that Charlie recognized deep in her own marrow. The man's head snapped toward Charlie. Despite the exhaustion ghosting his features, his dark eyes were as sharp as obsidian. In one fluid, practiced motion, he raised a heavy black pistol. The metallic click of the safety being disengaged echoed through the hollow space like a thunderclap. "One more step," Junwoo rasped, the barrel of the gun locked onto Charlie's forehead, "and I'll be the last thing you ever see." Charlie didn't run. She didn't even scream. She stood perfectly still, one hand deathly tight on the strap of her worn backpack. She looked at the gun, then at the man's blood-slicked side, and finally at the girl, Yuna, whose small fingers were white from gripping her father's lapel. The dominance in the man's posture was a lie, his hand was trembling, just a fraction, from the sheer effort of staying conscious. "You're bleeding through your shirt," Charlie said, her voice small but eerily steady in the industrial silence. Junwoo's eyes narrowed, his gaze scanning her faded denim jacket and messy braid, looking for a hidden weapon, a wire, a sign that she was one of O's professional shadows. He found nothing but a hungry girl who looked more like a stray kitten than an assassin. "Go away, kid," he commanded, though his arm dipped an inch as a wave of dizziness washed over him. "This isn't a place for you." "The men in the black SUVs are circling the docks," Charlie replied, stepping not away, but a fraction closer. "They have flashlights. If you stay here, they'll find you in 5 minutes. But I know a place where they won't." Junwoo stared at her, caught between the instinct to kill a witness and the desperate realization that this tiny, dirt-smudged girl was the only shield his daughter had left. The heavy pulse of a helicopter thrashed the air outside, its searchlight sweeping across the warehouse's high, shattered windows in rhythmic stabs of white. Junwoo's grip on the pistol tightened, his knuckles white, but the sheer weight of his blood loss was dragging his head down. He looked at Charlie, then at Yuna, who was trembling so violently she had gone silent. He made a choice, not out of trust, but out of the cold, calculated mathematics of survival. "Lead," he commanded, his voice a jagged whisper. Charlie didn't hesitate. She ducked under a row of rusted pipes, gesturing for them to follow. Junwoo struggled to his feet, a low groan escaping his clenched teeth as he hoisted Yuna into his good arm. He used the concrete wall as a crutch, his polished dress shoes dragging against the grit. Charlie led them toward the rear of the warehouse, where a massive, discarded shipping crate sat skewed against a brick partition. "In here," she breathed, sliding behind the crate into a gap so narrow Junwoo had to turn sideways, his suit jacket snagging on the rough wood. Behind the debris lay a heavy iron floor grate, hidden beneath a layer of filthy canvas. Charlie hauled it back, revealing a ladder descending into a humid, lightless throat of brick and shadow. Just as Junwoo lowered Yuna into the hole, the warehouse's main doors groaned open. The sharp, professional beams of high-powered tactical lights cut through the gloom above them. "Check the perimeter," a voice barked, Executive O's men. "He's wounded. He couldn't have gone far." Charlie's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She scrambled down the ladder, reaching up to guide Yuna's small feet. Junwoo followed, his movements heavy and clumsy. He pulled the canvas and the grate back into place just as the sweep of a flashlight passed directly over the crate above their heads. They stood in the stifling, subterranean silence, listening to the rhythmic thud of combat boots pacing mere inches above them. Junwoo held his breath, his hand clamped gently over Yuna's mouth, his other hand still clutching the gun. He looked at Charlie in the dark, his intense, dark eyes finally showing a flicker of something other than ironclad suspicion. When the footsteps finally receded, Charlie turned and clicked on a small, dim penlight. It revealed a narrow tunnel that opened into a cavernous, forgotten space. This was her grandfather's legacy, a basement workshop filled with the scent of oil, old wood, and copper. It was a tomb for machines, but to Charlie, it was a fortress. "They won't find the hatch," Charlie whispered, her voice reflecting off the stone walls. "My grandpa built it so the city inspectors would never see it. You're safe here. For now." Jun-woo sank onto a tattered leather workbench stool, the dominance in his posture finally fracturing as he slumped forward. The king was safe, but as the light hit the expanding dark stain on his charcoal suit, Charlie realized the real battle had only just begun. The basement workshop was a sanctuary of shadows, smelling of ancient grease and the cold, damp scent of underground stone. Jun-woo collapsed against a heavy oak workbench, his breath hitching in ragged, shallow intervals. The intense, predatory focus in his eyes was beginning to glaze, a thin film of cold sweat making his light to medium skin shimmer under the dim glow of Charlie's penlight. Yuna clung to his side, her cream-colored sweater now streaked with the soot of the tunnels, her large eyes fixed on the dark, spreading wetness on her father's charcoal blazer. Charlie didn't waste a second. She scrambled toward a rusted metal cabinet in the corner, her old sneakers squeaking on the floor. She returned dragging a battered, orange plastic box marked with a faded red cross, a relic her grandfather had kept from his days at the shipyard. "I need to see it," Charlie said, her voice dropping into a grounded, practical register that seemed far too old for a 9-year-old girl. Jun-woo's jaw tightened, his teeth bared in a grimace of pure, stubborn will. He fumbled with the buttons of his suit jacket, his fingers clumsy and slick. Charlie reached out, her small, dirt-smudged hand steady as she helped him peel back the expensive wool and the ruined white silk of his shirt. The wound was a jagged tear along his ribs, weeping deep crimson. Charlie opened the kit. It wasn't much, some yellowed gauze, a bottle of stinging antiseptic, and a needle and thread meant for heavy canvas, but it was all the invisible world offered. "This is going to hurt," she whispered. "A lot." Jun-woo reached out, his hand find Yuna's smaller one. He squeezed it gently, forcing a terrifyingly calm smile onto his face despite the agony lancing through his side. "I am fine, Yuna. Look at me. Just look at me." As Charlie poured the antiseptic over the wound, Jun-woo's entire body spasmed. A low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest, but he refused to scream. He locked eyes with his daughter, his dark brown gaze burning with an absolute, dominant love that acted as his only anesthetic. He stayed upright, a wounded king refusing to fall, because he knew that if he closed his eyes, the world would become a place of pure terror for the girl clutching his hand. Charlie worked with a grim, focused empathy. She cleaned the grit from the wound and pressed the gauze down with all her weight to stem the flow. She was tiny, her faded denim jacket swallowed by the shadows of the workbench, but in that moment, she was the only thing standing between Jun-woo and the darkness. "You're very brave," Charlie murmured, looking at Yuna, then back at the man who was bleeding for her. Jun-woo leaned his head back against the workbench, his breathing finally leveling out into a pained, rhythmic wheeze. He looked at the orphan girl who was currently saving his life with the hands of a scavenger. The suspicion was still there, buried deep, but it was being replaced by a heavy, silent debt. He was a man who commanded empires, now dependent on a girl who owned nothing but a backpack and a basement. The antiseptic's sharp sting lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of ozone from an old generator in the corner. Jun-woo lay back against the workbench, his face a mask of pale marble, but the clarity in his eyes had returned, a cold, calculating light that belonged to a man who had survived 1,000 betrayals. Yuna had finally drifted into a fitful sleep on a pile of clean burlap sacks, her small hand still tucked into the crook of her father's elbow. Charlie sat on a milk crate, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of Junwoo's chest. The silence of the basement felt like a living thing, a temporary truce between them and the world above. "You aren't just a wealthy man, are you?" Charlie asked softly, her voice cutting through the hum of the workshop. "People don't bring helicopters for a simple robbery." Junwoo turned his head, his dark gaze fixing on her with a weight that made the room feel smaller. "In my world, there is no such thing as a simple robbery. There is only succession and elimination." He winced as he shifted his weight, his hand moving protectively toward Yuna. "The men searching for us, Executive O's men, they aren't just looking for my head. They are looking for the key I carry." Charlie looked at his hands, then at his pockets, confused. "A key? I didn't see one." "It isn't a piece of metal, Charlie," Junwoo rasped, his voice dropping into a low, lethal register. "The Black Dragon Syndicate's fortune is locked behind a biometric vault that hasn't been opened in 30 years. It doesn't require a password or a card. It requires the bloodline." He looked at Yuna, his expression a haunting mix of fierce pride and devastating guilt. "The vault is coded to the retinal patterns and DNA of the dragon's heirs. Without Yuna, the syndicate's billions stay frozen. To Executive O, my daughter isn't a child. She is the ultimate master key. If he captures her, he doesn't need me anymore. He only needs her eyes to open the doors to an empire." The weight of the revelation hit Charlie like a physical blow. She looked at the small girl in the cream sweater, realized that the princess wasn't just a nickname, she was a living treasure chest. The industrial isolation of the basement suddenly felt less like a hideout and more like a vault of its own. "So as long as she's with you, they'll never stop," Charlie whispered. "They will burn this city to the ground to find her," Junwoo replied, his jaw tightening. "I was a fool to think my shadow was long enough to hide her. But I will not let them turn my daughter into a tool for a traitor." He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of Charlie's denim jacket. The dominant, powerful man was gone, replaced by a father making a silent, desperate plea. "You saved us once tonight, little scavenger. But the world I am describing, it is a monster you cannot imagine." Charlie looked from the wounded king to the sleeping heir. She thought of her own empty stomach and her grandfather's ghost, then squared her shoulders. "I've lived with monsters my whole life. At least I know the way through the dark." The silence of the workshop was suddenly violated by a sound that didn't belong to the settling dust or the hum of the old generator. Above them, the iron floor grate groaned, not with the weight of the wind, but under the careful, heavy pressure of a tactical boot. Charlie's head snapped up, her wide, dark eyes reflecting the sudden spike of adrenaline. The ordinary world was gone, the hunters had finally sniffed out the hole in the floor. Junwoo's hand went instantly to his pistol, his knuckles white as he tried to push himself up from the workbench. He was a man of lethal action, but his body betrayed him, a sharp gasp of pain escaping his teeth as his side began to bleed anew. "Don't move," Charlie hissed, her voice a sharp, commanding thread in the dark. "If you shoot, the rest of them will hear. They'll swarm us." She didn't wait for his protest. Charlie moved with the frantic, calculated grace of a girl who had spent years turning trash into tools. She scrambled to a pile of industrial scrap near the entrance of the tunnel, heavy, rusted drive chains and jagged copper plates. In the dim light, she saw the silhouette of a man descending the ladder, a high-powered flashlight beam cutting through the gloom like a scalpel. Charlie grabbed a heavy, oil-slicked pulley and a coil of high-tension wire her grandfather had used for hoisting engines. Working in a blurred frenzy of movement, she looped the wire across the narrow mouth of the tunnel entrance, anchoring it to a heavy floor-mounted lathe. She retreated into the shadows, pulling the pulley tight over a rusted ceiling beam. The hunter reached the bottom, his black tactical gear making him look like a shadow given form. He moved with a professional, predatory caution, his silenced submachine gun leading the way. As he stepped into the tunnel, his boot snagged the wire. Charlie let go. 100 pounds of rusted iron gears, suspended by the pulley, swung out of the darkness with a sickening, heavy whoosh. It struck the hunter squarely in the chest, the impact sounding like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. The man was launched backward, his flashlight spinning across the floor as his head cracked against the stone wall with a final, hollow thud. The silence returned, heavier than before. Charlie stood over the fallen soldier, her chest heaving, her hand still gripping the rough wire. She looked at the man's lifeless eyes, then back at Jun-woo, who was watching her with a look of profound, stunned respect. The little scavenger had just neutralized a professional assassin with a piece of junk in a moment of pure, terrifying bravery. He was alone, Charlie whispered, her voice trembling just a fraction. A scout. But the others, they'll realize he's gone soon. Jun-woo looked at the girl in the faded denim jacket, then at his daughter, who had woken up and was staring at the fallen man with wide, silent eyes. He realized then that Charlie wasn't just hiding them, she was at war. The metallic scent of the fallen hunter hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder that the basement sanctuary had been breached. Yuna sat upright on the burlap sacks, her small frame convulsing with silent, racking sobs. The sight of the man in black tactical gear, broken and still on the cold stone floor, had shattered the last of her childish defenses. She wasn't just a Mafia daughter anymore, she was a terrified 7-year-old lost in a tomb of rusted iron. Jun-woo reached for her, his face contorted in a mask of helpless agony. His hands, which had signed death warrants and commanded thousands, hovered over her, shaking. He could protect her from bullets, but he didn't know how to protect her from the memory of the violence. The dominant, lethal aura he carried was useless against a broken heart. Charlie stepped past the fallen soldier, her own heart still thundering against her ribs. She saw the king faltering, his dark eyes brimming with a desperate, silent plea for help. She sat on the edge of the burlap, not reaching out to touch Yuna yet, but simply existing in her space. "It's okay to be scared," Charlie whispered, her voice a soft contrast to the industrial grit of the room. "The shadows can't hurt you here. My grandpa used to say the machines are all sleeping, and they're dreaming of when they were new." She began to hum a low, steady melody, a song her grandfather had sung to her when the winter winds rattled the warehouse windows. It was a simple, repetitive tune, devoid of the complexity of the world outside. Gradually, the humming turned into words, a lullaby about a silver boat on a river made of stars. As Charlie sang, the oppressive tension in the basement began to shift. The workshop wasn't a battlefield or a hideout anymore. For a few fragile minutes, it was just a nursery. Yuna's breathing slowed, her frantic gasps smoothing out into rhythmic sighs. She leaned her head against Charlie's shoulder, the cream-colored knit of her sweater pressing against the faded denim of Charlie's jacket. Junwoo watched them, his jaw loosening for the first time in years. He saw his daughter find peace in the arms of a girl who had nothing, and he realized that the dragon's heir didn't need a biometric vault or a billion-dollar empire. She needed this. She needed a world where a song was more powerful than a gun. The industrial isolation that had always been Junwoo's armor felt suddenly cold and hollow. He looked at Charlie, the little scavenger who had killed a man and then sang a child to sleep, and he felt a profound, terrifying shift in his soul. A world without violence wasn't just a dream, it was sitting right in front of him, illuminated by a single, flickering penlight. The lullaby's final notes lingered in the stagnant air, but the peace it brought was as fragile as a breath. Yuna had finally fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep against Charlie's shoulder, her small face softened by the dim light. Junwoo remained a silent sentinel, his dark eyes fixed on Charlie with a new, somber depth. But the stillness was abruptly shattered by a harsh, static-heavy burst from Charlie's backpack. Charlie's hand flew to her bag, pulling out an old, battered walkie-talkie she'd tuned for monitoring local courier channels. It wasn't the voice of a delivery driver that crackled through the speaker, but a cold, clipped tone that made Junwoo's blood run cold. Scout 3 is unresponsive. Move the perimeter in. Sector 14 is the only blind spot left. Junwoo's posture went rigid, his hand instantly finding the grip of his pistol. "Give it to me," he rasped. Charlie handed him the device, her fingers trembling. As the static cleared, a second voice, silky, arrogant, and devoid of mercy, echoed through the basement. It was Executive O. "He's in there. I can smell the desperation. Burn every level if you have to, but I want the girl intact. The king is irrelevant now." Junwoo's jaw tightened until the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. He knew that voice, it was the sound of a decade of loyalty being discarded like trash. He looked up at the ceiling, his gaze piercing the layers of concrete and steel between them and the street. "They're close," Charlie whispered, her wide eyes reflecting the blue flicker of the radio's display. "That frequency is strong. They're within 2 blocks. If they start a floor-by-floor sweep, the thermal scanners will pick up the heat from the generator." The industrial isolation of the workshop had become a trap. The very walls that had hidden them were now closing in. Junwoo looked at Yuna, then at Charlie. He was a man used to commanding legions, but he was trapped in a body that was failing him, reliant on a girl who lived on the margins of society. "Oh, doesn't just want the vault," Junwoo said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "He wants to erase the very memory of the Lee family. He thinks he's hunting a wounded animal, but he's forgotten that a cornered dragon is at its most dangerous." He turned back to Charlie, his expression hard as obsidian. "The basement is no longer a sanctuary. We have 10 minutes before they breach the main hatch. If we stay, we die." Charlie looked at her grandfather's old tools, then at the narrow ventilation shaft in the corner, a path only someone of her size could truly navigate. The time for hiding was over. The hunt had entered its final, most desperate phase. The damp walls of the basement seemed to sweat as the sound of heavy tires grinding over gravel vibrated through the foundation. They were here. Charlie stood by the narrow mouth of the ventilation shaft, her small, inexpensive backpack cinched tight against her shoulders. She looked at Junwoo, who was struggling to wedge himself and Yuna into the shadowed recess behind the heavy industrial lathe, the only spot the thermal scanners might miss if the heat from the cooling generator masked them. "You can't move fast enough with that wound," Charlie whispered, her voice a sharp blade of reality. "If they see 3 heat signatures moving together, it's over. But if they see one fast-moving ghost in the rafters, they'll follow it." Junwoo reached out, his fingers catching the worn denim of her sleeve. His dark brown eyes were filled with a fierce, paternal agony. "Charlie, no. They are not street thugs. They will shoot to kill." "They won't," she replied with a hauntingly confident smile. "You said it yourself. They think Yuna is the only key." In the dark, in these vents, a small body in a backpack looks exactly like the prize they're looking for. Before he could command her to stay, Charlie scrambled into the shaft. The galvanized steel was cold and slick with decades of dust, but she knew every turn. She began to kick the metal siding, the rhythmic clang-clang-clang echoing upward into the warehouse like a beacon. "I see movement in the northeast vents," the voice barked through the radio. "Small stature. It's the girl. She's heading for the roof." Charlie moved with a frantic, desperate speed. She wasn't just a scavenger anymore, she was the lead rabbit in a hunt for wolves. She scrambled through the labyrinth of the ceiling, purposefully rattling the louvers and dropping her penlight through a grate to draw their fire. Below her, the warehouse erupted into chaos. Heavy boots thundered across the floor, and beams of high-powered light danced across the rafters, chasing her shadow. Target sighted. Level 2 mezzanine. Charlie didn't look back. She crawled until her knees were raw and her fingernails bled, leading the trail of flashlights further and further away from the basement hatch. Every shout from the men below was a second bought for the man and the child hiding in the dark. She was terrified, her breath came in shallow, jagged gasps, but as she saw the soldier's silhouette surging toward the far end of the building, a cold sense of triumph surged through her. She was the invisible girl, the nothing in the alleyway, the ghost of the industrial district. And for the first time in her life, being invisible was the most powerful thing in the world. The ventilation shaft ended in a rusted deadbolt, leaving Charlie trapped in a narrow crawlspace just above the workshop floor. Below, the heavy iron hatch she had fought so hard to hide was being kicked inward. The goose chase had bought them minutes, but Executive O was no fool, he had followed the silence back to the center of the storm. The girl in the vents was a distraction, a voice drawled, smooth as silk and cold as a funeral shroud. Charlie dropped from the ceiling, landing hard on the concrete just as Executive O stepped into the basement. He was flanked by 3 soldiers, their submachine guns leveled at the shadows. He looked out of place in the grime, his suit was ivory, his movements graceful, his eyes devoid of the humanity that currently flickered in the man he had betrayed. "Move away from the lathe," Junwoo, O commanded, the light of his tactical torch cutting through the dark. "Give me the master key, and perhaps I'll let you die with the dignity of a king rather than the stench of a rat." Junwoo was slumped in the darkness, his face ash-gray, his hand trembling as he held Yuna's head against his chest. He looked defeated, a fallen dragon at the end of its breath. But as Charlie scrambled to his side, ignoring the red dots of the laser sights dancing across her chest, something shifted. "I am not a rat," Junwoo rasped. With a guttural roar of sheer, agonizing will, Junwoo began to rise. He reached out, his heavy hand clamping onto Charlie's shoulder. She braced herself, her small frame straining under his massive weight, her old sneakers digging into the grit of the floor. She became his pillar, his living crutch. Junwoo stood. His charcoal suit was ruined, his blood was a dark map of his failures, but as he leaned on the 9-year-old scavenger, his presence regained its terrifying dominance. He towered over the room, his dark eyes burning with a lethal, focused light that made the soldiers hesitate. "You think you have won because you have more steel," Junwoo said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the workshop. "But you have forgotten the first code, oh. A king does not lead because of a vault. He leads because he is the shield for those who cannot shield themselves." Beside him, Yuna stood tall, clutching the hem of his jacket, and Charlie stood firm, her hand gripping the strap of her backpack, her wide eyes fixed on the ivory-suited traitor. For the first time, Junwoo didn't just see one daughter, he saw the future of his bloodline and the girl who had given him the strength to stand for it. "Kill him," Oh whispered, his face twisting in a mask of sudden, frantic fear. "Kill them all." The air in the basement reached a freezing stasis as the soldiers adjusted their grips, the cold metallic sliding of bolts echoing like a death knell. Executive O's order hung in the air, a poisonous command that demanded the end of a legacy. The red laser sights danced across Junwoo's chest, hovering over the very heart he had spent the night trying to save. Junwoo's hand tightened on Charlie's shoulder, a silent signal for her to run, to save herself while he spent his final seconds as a human shield. But Charlie didn't move back. Instead, she stepped forward. She pried herself from under the weight of the Mafia boss and walked into the center of the kill zone. Her small, faded denim jacket was a stark, jarring contrast to the black tactical gear of the men standing before her. She didn't have a weapon, she only had the backpack that identified her as a child of the streets and the wide, dark eyes of someone who still believed the world had a conscience. "Stop," she cried, her voice high and clear, vibrating with a raw, terrifying bravery. She stood directly in the line of fire, her small body obscuring Junwoo and Yuna. The soldiers flinched, their fingers hovering over triggers but refusing to pull. In the world of the Syndicate, they were trained to kill kings, to topple empires, and to erase rivals. They were not trained to shoot a 9-year-old girl who looked like she belonged in a classroom, not a slaughterhouse. "Move, you little brat." Oh screamed, his ivory suit trembling with rage. "Shoot through her. Now." But the men didn't move. They looked at Charlie, at her dirty sneakers, her messy ponytail, and the way she didn't flinch even as the red dots settled on her forehead. For a heartbeat, the bold code of the Mafia cracked. They weren't looking at a witness or an obstacle, they were looking at their own daughters, their own sisters, the very innocents they claimed their organization was built to protect. "Look at her!" Charlie shouted, pointing at Yuna, who was huddled behind her father. "She's just a girl. And he's just her dad. Is this what you are? Are you just monsters who kill kids in basements?" The lead soldier's barrel lowered a fraction of an inch. It was a microscopic shift, but in the world of Lee Junwoo, it was an opening. The silence was no longer a threat, it was a mirror, forcing every man in that room to see the monster Oh wanted them to be. Junwoo watched the back of the girl who had nothing, standing as the ultimate shield for the man who had everything. In that moment, the Black Dragon realized that his empire hadn't been saved by a bullet or a bribe, but by the sheer, stubborn purity of a child who refused to let the darkness win. The council chamber was a cathedral of glass and cold ambition, perched high above the city where the rain streaked the windows like tears. The air inside was heavy with the scent of expensive tobacco and the silent, lethal judgment of 12 men who decided the fate of the underworld. They sat around a table of polished obsidian, their faces obscured by the dim, recessed lighting, waiting for the ghost of a king to appear. When the heavy oak doors swung open, the silence broke. Lee Junwoo walked in, his charcoal suit still stained with the grime of the warehouse, but his posture was absolute. He didn't come alone. On his left, he held Yuna's hand, on his right, he walked with Charlie. The sight of a 9-year-old girl in a faded denim jacket walking into the inner sanctum of the Black Dragon Syndicate caused a ripple of visible shock. Executive O stood at the far end of the table, his ivory suit now looking like a shroud. "This is a mockery," he hissed, his voice cracking. "He brings a street rat into the council. He has lost his mind along with his blood." Junwoo didn't look at him. He looked at the elders. "I bring a witness," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that commanded the room. "Not of my crimes, but of yours. You allow men like O to lead because you think honor is a weakness. You think the bold code is written in the blood of our enemies. But this girl, she showed me it is written in the lives we protect." He nodded to Charlie. She stood small against the backdrop of the city lights, her hand still gripping the strap of her backpack. The 12 elders leaned forward, their sharp, calculating gazes fixed on the orphan. "He tried to kill them," Charlie said, her voice steady and clear, echoing off the glass walls. "He didn't care that Yuna was a child. He didn't care about the rules you all talk about. He left them in the dark to die because he wanted a vault full of money. I saw him. I saw his men turn their guns on a girl who was just trying to go home." She looked directly at Executive O, her dark eyes filled with a searing, honest light that no lie could survive. "He's not a leader. He's just a bully in a white suit." The silence that followed was suffocated by the weight of the truth. One by one, the elders looked from the trembling Executive O to the defiant little girl. In the brutal logic of their world, Charlie was a variable they hadn't accounted for, the voice of an innocent that rendered their politics meaningless. Junwoo stepped forward, placing a hand on Charlie's shoulder. The judgment was silent, but it was final. The elders didn't need to speak, they simply looked away from O, a collective dismissal that signaled his death. Junwoo had reclaimed his throne, but as he looked at Charlie, it was clear he no longer wanted to rule from the shadows. 3 months later, the morning sun broke over the Seattle skyline, casting a pale gold light across the floor-to-ceiling windows of a high-rise penthouse. The cold, industrial isolation of the warehouse district felt like a lifetime away. Lee Junwoo stood by the window, no longer clad in a blood-stained suit, but in a simple, charcoal-colored sweater. The sharp, predatory edge in his gaze had softened into a quiet, watchful peace. He was no longer the Black Dragon, the syndicate had been dismantled, its vast assets moved into legitimate technology and shipping firms that operated in the light. In the center of the living room, Yuna was laughing. She looked vibrant in a new sunflower yellow dress, her long hair neatly braided as she chased a small golden retriever puppy across the plush rug. The fear that had once clouded her dark brown eyes was gone, replaced by the effortless joy of a child who knew she was safe. Charlie sat at the sprawling marble kitchen island, staring down at a heavy embossed envelope that had arrived that morning. Inside was a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious preparatory academies in the country, but that wasn't why her eyes were glossy. It was the document tucked behind the letter, a legal adoption decree, bearing the name Charlotte Hazley. "It's too much," Charlie whispered, her hand tracing the worn edges of her old denim jacket, which she still kept draped over the back of her chair as a reminder of the girl she used to be. "I just found you in a warehouse. I was just looking for scrap metal." Jun-woo walked over, his footsteps silent on the hardwood. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the same shoulder he had leaned on when he was a dying king and she was his only pillar. "You weren't looking for scrap, Charlie. You were looking for a reason to stay visible. And I was looking for a reason to stop fighting a war that had no end." He pulled out a chair and sat beside her, his presence still dominant but now anchored by a profound, grounded warmth. "The scholarship is for your mind. The house is for your safety. But the name—" He paused, looking at Yuna, then back at the girl who had stood in front of a gun for them. "The name is because you are the daughter I chose." Charlie looked out at the city. She was no longer a ghost in the shadows or a scavenger in the vents. She was seen. She was loved. She reached out and took Jun-woo's hand, her small fingers interlocking with the ones that had once held a pistol. "I don't think I'll need the backpack anymore," she said, a small, brave smile breaking across her face. Jun-woo squeezed her hand, a final, silent oath between them. "No, Charlotte. From now on, we only carry what we want to keep." The core of this story lies in the reversal of the protector role. While Lee Jun-woo begins as the king with the power of life and death, it is Charlie's weakness, her small stature, her lack of status, and her simple empathy, that ultimately dismantles a corrupt empire. The story explores the idea that honor isn't a code written by men with guns, it is a promise kept to those who are vulnerable. By the end, the Black Dragon hasn't just escaped death, he has been redeemed by the very innocence he was forced to protect. The charcoal suit and the faded denim jacket merge into a new family crest, symbolizing that wealth and poverty are irrelevant when measured against the courage to stand for one another. This is a story of empowerment and belonging. Charlie spent her life trying to be invisible, to survive, believing that being seen led to danger. Jun-woo spent his life being feared to survive, believing that being known led to betrayal. Through their shared trauma, they learn a transformative truth: to be truly seen by someone who loves you is the only real sanctuary. The story concludes with the transition from survival to living, reminding us that no one is too small to change the course of a kingdom, and no one is too lost to find their way home. That was the story of an invisible girl and a fallen king. Charlie saved a king, but in the end, who do you think was truly saved? Drop a note in the comments if you think Jun-woo needed Charlie more than she needed him. And I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Charlie's shoes? Let me know, and I'll see you in the conversation below. If you believe that innocence is the ultimate power, please press that like button right now. It helps our invisible girl reach more people. We're building a community of storytellers here, and we don't want you to miss a single chapter. Do not forget to subscribe for stories like this so you never miss a high-stakes moment or an emotional transformation. Also, check out the pinned comment for a sneak peek at our next story, The Scavenger's Ransom. See you in the next one.